everyone, and welcome to the video guide for PAF, or Purpose, Audience and Format, or Form. And really this is the first thing that any of you should be thinking about when you approach reading any non-fiction text or writing any non-fiction text. So let's get started with the learning objective for this session then. Our learning objective today is to recognise and plan purpose, audience and form. So that's recognise for the reading section and use it to help you plan for the writing section. So you can see that purpose, audience, form play a really important role in both sections or both papers for English. So let's start with the basics. What is PAF? We know that the letters stand for purpose, audience and form, but when we're talking about purpose, what we mean is why was the text written? When we're talking about audience, we're talking about who it was written for. And when we're talking about form or format, we're talking about how it was written. And for form or format, that could be to do with the way it looks on the page, but it also could be to do with the techniques used in the writing. So in other words, your aforist techniques, figurative language, all of those techniques that you've learnt about in your lessons. Okay, so over to you to start with for purposes then. What you need to do first is pause this video and make a list of as many purposes of different texts that you can, because this is going to be really good revision for you. Let's just recap together then. Firstly, you have persuade texts, or texts written to persuade. These can be just about any kind of text, a letter, an article. You have text to entertain. So mostly these can be fiction texts, but some articles can also be very entertaining. You have text to argue. So again, newspaper articles, magazine articles can argue, so can a letter. Lots of things can be written to argue. Advise, things like leaflets, posters can be written to advise somebody of something. Instruct, so instruct, the clue's in the name really, isn't it? Things like instructions, giving you steps for how to do something. Mostly those texts are instructional. And then finally text written to inform. I think it's really important that you remember for the exam, especially for the reading section, that most texts will have more than one purpose. So it's not a formula that you can stick to, but it's just really important to remember that you might be looking for more than one purpose. Okay, on to audience then. So all texts are aimed at an audience, whether that's lots of people or whether that's a narrow audience, just a few people. But certainly there is going to be an audience for every text that is written. What you need to think about is what that audience is like. So what age group? That's going to affect the way you write it. You wouldn't write for somebody of your own age in the same way that you'd write for an old age pensioner, for example. Their gender. Okay, is it aimed at men? Is it aimed at women? Is it aimed at both? And how are you going to appeal to those different groups? Again, something that you need to plan for and think carefully about. Locations. There was a question that came up a couple of years ago about the rise of the urban fox. Are you appealing to people who live in the countryside, or are you appealing to people who live in the city? What about their interests? Is it an article aimed specifically at a group of people who have a particular interest? That's something to consider very carefully. Wealth might sound a funny one, but wealth or class is really important. Imagine if you were trying to write a letter to save the local NHS hospital. You're not going to be aiming it at people who can afford private healthcare. So you need to remember to adapt the way you write to suit your audience as well as your purpose. So remember, who are you going to be aiming it at? What gender are they? How old are they? What might their interests be? How are you going to write to best appeal to the group that you're aiming your piece of writing, your non-fiction text at? And similarly for the reading paper, how are you going to know who that is aimed at? Okay, what are the clues? Okay, on to form or format, some people call it as well. Okay, so in the exam, the most popular ones that come up are leaflet. You could be asked to write a leaflet. You could also be asked to write a report, although this isn't a text type that comes up quite as often, so it's still important that you revise it and that you feel confident in how to write in that form. A letter comes up quite often, especially in the writing section. Most years, one of the writing tasks will be a letter. Article, another really popular one that comes up both in the reading section and in the writing section, and that could be newspaper or magazine articles. And then finally a speech, although a speech doesn't come up as often. Okay, another task then for you. For each text type, I want you to make a list of the features of that format. So what do you expect to see in that kind of text? So a top tip there is to think about how the information is presented on the page and the features of content, so what techniques perhaps are being used. So it's time again for you to pause and see if you can make a list of the features of format for each of those texts. Now you can do that however you like, a list, a spider map, mind map, however you like. Right, let's start with a leaflet then, and I've tried to trim this down to 6 main techniques per text type, so it's not so overwhelming. Leaflet heading is really important, that you're signposting for the reader where information is and how it's organised. Leaflets will often also feature pictures and colour. In the exam, don't go to town too much on those, just keep them nice and simple, otherwise you could waste all your time doing pictures and colouring. Lots of facts contained in leaflets, so if it's for a museum, for example, you'd expect to see facts about where it is, the phone number, all sorts of things. Opinions, now often in leaflets they can be quotes, so maybe if somebody's been to this museum, a quote about how great it is and what a great day out it is for all of the family. Rule of 3 is often used in leaflets as well, particularly if they're persuading you to go somewhere or do something. And then finally their sections, or organisation of information in sections, is really important. Okay, on to speeches then. So the 6 main features I think of speeches are rule of 3. Rule of 3 is really powerful in a speech and used very often to good effect, especially when you're talking about rule of 3 alongside repetition. Addressing the audience, so making the reader think that you are speaking to them directly. So a lot of use of the word you, for example, would be effective. Repetition and rhetorical questions. If you think about some of the most famous speeches of our time, lots of repetitions used. Think of Martin Luther King, think of Barack Obama. Opinions, lots of opinions used in speeches. Very strong opinions, very persuasively used. So opinions can be a powerful thing, and I've just realised that I've used rule of 3 twice. That's not on purpose, although it is a really important technique to use in your speech writing, so let's add extra emphasis there. And finally then, emotive language, really powerful emotive language is going to help you. On to reports then. Reports are different altogether. Again, a very structured text. Headings are your friend in reports, so make sure the information is in chunks or sections with headings and subheadings also. Diagrams, so charts, pictures, are all really useful for you in reports to illustrate the point you are making. Facts, reports are incredibly factual documents, so you're going to be dealing mostly in facts if you are writing a report. Statistics are also there to help you, so statistics will support some of the facts, some of the points that you are making, so use numerical values as well as written facts. And lastly, reports are generally unbiased, so the information you're giving doesn't have a bias, it presents a very unbiased picture of what you are trying to write your report about. Finally then, sections, so use sections in your report writing. Okay, on to a letter. Remember, this is an important one to revise. It's a big one that comes up. They can be formal or informal. So you might be asked to write a letter to a family member, to a friend, or to somebody formally. So get the tone right. You'd expect to see addresses on a letter. So your address, their address. You need to perhaps go and revise what that looks like on the page. in that first paragraph, the very first thing you're going to explain is why you are writing. Why are you writing the letter? That's the first thing that comes, usually in a formal or informal letter. Letters are also very structured, so perhaps have your 4 or 5 points and be really structured. Get those in paragraphs or chunks that you want to write them in. Letters always have a greeting or an ending. Make sure you revise those and get those right. So your dear sir or madam, or dear if you know their name, and then your yours faithfully or yours sincerely at the end. Letters also contain a date. Okay, on to articles then. Again, a really popular one that comes up year after year. Articles will often contain pictures or photographs. Again, don't go to town on the pictures, just an indication that you understand that that's one of the things featured in the form of an article. Headings and then captions as well. So you might have a headline, you might have subheadings for different sections of your article, you might have captions under the picture. Your article could be used for a newspaper or a magazine and could have multiple purposes. So I can't tell you the purpose of your article, but it could be anything. An article may also be biased or unbiased. Newspaper articles tend to appear unbiased, but are often secretly quite biased. And they may use all of the A4 techniques. So articles are a really big, broad one, and that if you get an article in the exam, that's great. You know, you can really go to town on what you say. Also remember your structure, really, really important for articles. Okay, so finally everyone, what you really need to remember about purpose, audience and format is that they can help you plan your answers for the reading section and for the writing section. For the writing section especially, I recommend doing a really quick 2-minute, 3-minute plan where you're outlining, before you start writing, the purpose of what you're writing, the audience of what you're writing, and the format that you're going to use to write in.